Starting off with the worst win condition in the game, Elixir Golem. The reason why Elixir Golem is so bad, even though it only costs 3 Elixir, is because when all the blobs are destroyed, you're giving your opponent 4 Elixir, and on top of that, it doesn't have very good synergy inside of a lot of decks, and the decks it is used in, a lot of the other cards in the deck are not very good too, such as the Healer and the Night Witch. Next up, we got the 3 Musketeers. The 3 Musketeers are a little bit better than the Elixir Golem, but they are still not that amazing just because they cost 9 Elixir, which means they're very hard to fit inside of decks. You always have to pair them with specific cards such as the Elixir Collector, and on top of that, spells such as the Poison and the Fireball are just going to be so effective at wiping them out. Coming in as the 21st best win condition, we got the Skeleton Barrel. The Skeleton Barrel is going to be pretty good inside of log bait decks, mortar decks, and goes well with the Skeleton King, but the main downside of the Skeleton Barrel is it is so easy to counter with pretty much any small spell in the game, like the Barbarian Barrel, Log, Snowball, and Zap, you name it. Sometimes you can build some pretty threatening pushes with the Golem, but the biggest issue is because he costs 8 Elixir, oftentimes you're not able to build those pushes until double or triple Elixir, and at that point it might already be too late. Also, stuff like the Inferno Tower, Inferno Dragon, or just buildings in general can shut him down really easily. Next up, we got the Giant. The Giant pairs so well inside of Giant Graveyard and Giant Double Prince, but the biggest downside of the Giant is similar to the Golem. They're both very good tanks, but because they're both so slow, they often have such a hard time reaching the tower because of all the high DPS dealing cards and all the buildings to distract them. At number 18, we got the Ram Rider. She has that unique snare ability which actually makes her pretty good on defense. She can fully counter things like Balloon, but on offense is often her weakness because things like Zappies, Electro Wizard, and E-Giant just shut her down so easily, and also buildings, of course. Battle Ram is really useful to have inside of bridge spam decks. It can also be used on defense to kite things into the opposite lane, and it's even better ever since it got that 6% health buff. But, kind of like the Ram Rider, buildings and stuns are going to kill it super easy. Not too long ago, the Goblin Giant was one of the 3 worst win conditions in the game, but he also recently got a 6% health buff, and now he actually gets quite a lot of value. I would say his biggest flaw is probably the fact he's not too versatile, because for the most part he can only be used inside of Sparky. At number 15, we got the Expo. Expo for a while now has been a win condition that has been about average or slightly below average in strength. It has some matchups where it's pretty good, and of course as a win condition it has a lot of outplay potential, but there are some things such as Royal Giant and Earthquake that just make it so difficult to win in those types of matchups. Next up, we got the Goblin Barrel. Obviously, it is incredible inside of bait decks. With that being said, though, of course, Log, Bar Barrel, Arrows are going to be very easy to take it out. With that being said, though, you can easily outcycle those spells and still get damage with it. Electro Giant is probably one of the most average win conditions in the game right now. After they nerfed it, it is finally manageable for people to defend with buildings and also things like P.E.K.K.A. You can kill it with ease. With that being said, though, depending on the matchup, he might give you a hard time if you don't have one of those cards in your deck. At number 12, we got the Balloon. Of course, the Balloon pairs very well inside of Lava Loon, also inside of Lumber Loon Freeze, and Loon Cycle, and if your opponent doesn't have a lot of air counters, it can be tough to stop. But with that being said, if you have a building or a tornado, then it's super easy defense. Next up, we got the Royal Hogs. They're of course going to be very good inside of Recruit Hogs and also Royal Hog Cycle with the Earthquake. What's really good about them is the fact that you can split them. So even if your opponent has a Fireball, a Mega Knight, or a Valkyrie, you can just go for 2 in one lane, 2 in the other, and still get around that. Perhaps the main thing that's going to stop them very effectively is the Bomb Tower. Coming in at number 10, we got the Goblin Drill. Perhaps on mid-ladder, the Goblin Drill might not seem that good because of all the Valk, Wizard, and Mega Knight, but on the top of ladder, it is such a good win condition. It's amazing for getting chip damage. It pairs really nicely with the Tornado, the Fireball, and the Rocket, and even if you're getting in a pickle on the defensive end, you can use it on defense against things such as the Hog Rider or even the Electro Giant it's quite good against defensively. Next we got the Lava Hound. The Lava Hound gets a lot more value than the other tank win conditions such as the Golem and the Electro Giant simply because it's an air card, which means there's less things that can target it. And as a 7 elixir card, it is actually quite versatile. You can use Lava Loon, but also there's Lava Miner without the balloon, and sometimes people choose to use Lava decks with buildings such as the Tombstone, or you can use it without buildings and just use the Barbarians and the Inferno Drag if you want. The Wall Breakers do so much damage and get so much value for only 2 elixir, and the other thing too is you can split the Wall Breakers, send 1 in each lane, and they're super quick, which makes it really obnoxious for your opponent to deal with. Perhaps the only weakness of the Wall Breakers is as the game progresses and you get into double and triple elixir and there's more stuff going on, it's harder for them to reach the tower. At number 7, we have the Graveyard. The Graveyard for a while now has been one of the best win conditions in the game. Part of the reason it's so broken is because of the RNG aspect, meaning it spawns in random patterns and sequences, making it kinda unpredictable to defend. On top of that, in many matchups, it's pretty much guaranteed damage unless your opponent has a poison or a Mother Witch. Next is the Hog Rider. The Hog Rider deals so much damage, has a lot of health, and it's very quick, all for 4 elixir. It also has so many good decks that it pairs well in, and even if the opponent has a building, you can use the Earthquake and still break through it. Perhaps one of the only things that actually counters it very well is the Tornado. Royal Giant is the 5th best win condition in the game, and don't worry guys, I'm talking about the regular Royal Giant, not the Evolved. The Evolved win conditions I'm saving towards the end, they're also on this list. The reason why the Royal Giant is so good and the best tank in the game, and better than the Lava Hound and the Electro Giant for example, is because it's ranged, which means it's way easier to reach the tower with it, and if you're in a 2 tower situation, you can go RG in the pocket, which is a very OP play. Next up we got the Mortar, and I'm talking about the regular Mortar for now, not the Evolved one. For 2 less elixir, it just gets way more value than the Expo does. It also can be used on defense. It's great on offense as we know, but defensively against things like the Hog Rider and the Electro Giant, it's going to be a great tool against, and it's quite a versatile card. You can use Hog Mortar if you want, you could use Miner Mortar, there's also Mortar Bait, and more. Coming in at number 3, we got the Miner. Now, obviously, the Miner on its own doesn't deal a ton of damage and is often considered a secondary win condition, but because of how versatile he is, and because of how much health he has for a 3 elixir card, you can keep sending him in, and over time throughout the match, he'll accumulate chip damage, and he can just be paired in so many things. He can be used in Lava Hound, Minor Wall Breakers, Mortar, Giant Double Prince, and so much more. The 2nd best win condition in the game is the Evolved Royal Giant. So the regular Royal Giant was already good, but the Evolved one, as you guys know, has more health, and when it shoots, it deals that damage around it, which is able to kill things like skeletons or slowly damage things over time. And the most broken part of it all is you only need 1 cycle to use him, so that means every other Royal Giant you play is evolved and better. The number 1 best win condition in the game right now is the Evolved Mortar. It used to be the Evolved Royal Giant, but after the Evolved RG got nerfed, the Evolved Mortar barely surpasses it now because of how broken it is. It shoots a Goblin, it shoots faster, it has more health, and Evolved Mortar by itself can take a whole tower, and also on defense, it's absolutely busted too because it fires that Goblin pretty frequently, which is going to help you take out that tank or whatever it's shooting at. And it doesn't even matter that it requires 2 cycles instead of 1, because typically the Mortar is played in pretty fast cycle decks, meaning you're going to be able to get back to it with no problem whatsoever.